Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to this month's countywide virtual Firewise USA workshop. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Max Young. I'm the head of wildfire safety here at the Ventura Regional Fire Safe Council. Sometimes you hear from me, so I've met some of you folks, sometimes you do not. I work very closely with Natasha Saxena, who is the regional coordinator for Firewise USA here at the council. And today she's asked me to facilitate this month's workshop on Zone 0 and fire hazard severity zones, specifically what updates there have been to those two things in the past few months, and hopefully kind of explaining those updates in a way that maybe makes some sense. And then most importantly, pointing you folks in the direction of answers should you need more clarity or want to research some more of this information on your own. This afternoon, I'm going to be going through the Zone 0 updates first. So I will try to get to timelines and then specifically like the applicability of Zone 0 and the requirements. And then I'm going to get to the fire hazard severity zone updates. I'll be kind of touching on just briefly the insurance implications of those new maps and as well as parsing the map. So how do I find them? Where do I look? That kind of thing. Again, these workshops take place every third Friday of the month at 1 p.m. here on Zoom. Natasha does a tremendous amount of hard work on these things. So you have her to thank for those. I will say I will be referencing a tremendous amount of jargon, verbiage, documents, you name it. And so I've been trying to be good about keeping references more readily available for folks that watch these webinars and different workshops, getting you those links. So I put that file down here in the chat. Everybody should have access to it, and it's just the complete repository, everything that I use to inform what you're about to see. Almost all of the links of everything I did or found are going to be found on that document. So if you're interested and want to learn more or keep following up, go ahead and download that document. It's in the chat. Quick introductions. So I've introduced myself. I'm Max Young. I'm the head of wildfire safety. I've been with the Ventura Regional Fire Safe Council for about 3 years. And then also helping me to facilitate the Zoom and helping to facilitate the Q&A towards the end is Sarah Rodriguez, our operations assistant. With that all said, let's just get right into it. So Zone 0 updates. For those of us that have our camera on, give me a thumbs up in the camera if you know what Zone 0 is, if you've heard of it. Great. That's most of us. All right. So Zone 0 is a zone that makes up your defensible space. Now, Zone 0 refers to the first 5 feet from your structure. If you have a attachment like a fence, deck, patio, it goes around that and includes that because attachments are part of our home. It was first created or thought up in an assembly bill in 2020. And essentially that assembly bill told the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, who has regulatory authority over defensible space guidelines in the state, to create a new zone based on a lot of the science we've been coming up with and get some regulation out about that zone. So why are we doing this right now? The updates, what updates? Following the January 2025 LA wildfires, Governor Newsom issued an executive order, and a part of that executive order essentially told the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection that you have until the end of this year to finish the job that was given to you in 2020. And so we'll get into what that means, but it seems like for a long time we've known this was coming, didn't exactly know when or who for or what was going to be part of it. In the past few months, and especially in April, we have began to learn a lot more about what Zone 0 is going to actually look like in terms of applicability, enforcement, and the rules. So as we go through this, I'm going to try and parse out kind of three separate categories. Um, Zone 0 is incredibly important, and the science all shows its efficacy. I'm not going to get into that too much on this. This is going to be much more strictly the rules, who creates them, who enforces them, the why, and who they apply to, right? So I want to point out on this slide that there are kind of two different categories of rule makers and enforcers. The state, so that's the Office of the State Fire Marshal and the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, kind of are responsible for creating what the rules are and then applying them to where they see fit. Now, the enforcement of those rules, and then even some of the rules themselves, right? We can kind of, in local jurisdictions, go further. Those fall to the category of our local agencies and our local fire protection districts. So these are kind of three different things that we're going to get into: the rules, the applicability, and the enforcement. To go over a quick kind of down and dirty of the regulatory process, essentially, there are the rules for what Zone 0 will look like in the future. And those were created really through post-fire analysis. 7 of the top 10 California most devastating wildfires have occurred in the past 10 years. In the past 10 years, we've been learning a tremendous amount about how these urban conflagrations are occurring, and we're learning how to stop them, or what is going into making certain structures survive and have a better chance at survival versus others. Scientific study is a big part of that. And then stakeholder input. So the state has been receptive a tremendous amount to its local agencies. So it's going to LA County, Ventura County, Marin County, saying, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on this? And then the applicability and the regulatory authority, what's informing those things are really kind of the new fire hazard severity zone modeling, and then responsibility areas. So local responsibility area and state responsibility areas. The state has split the Zone 0 applicability into two separate categories, and that would be new buildings and new landscapes, and existing buildings and existing landscapes. So when these rules first come out, they're going to first apply to any new building or new construction and new landscape, right? So how that works is when they go into effect, any new applications for building permits or landscape plans that get submitted, things that aren't built yet, they'll need to apply those rules. And then 3 years later, so people have 3 years, is when those rules will begin to apply to homes within those same areas that already exist now. Okay, so where do the rules apply and where do they start? So I'm going to first remind us of some of those categories just so that we keep them in our brain. We have fire hazard severity zones, and within those, we have 3 classifications. We have moderate, high, and very high. And then we have 2 responsibility categories. So essentially for this, it's who finances the fire protection here. Now, we don't actually have to worry about that too much. In the state of California, there's a tremendously robust mutual aid system. So we in the state don't care whose land the fire is affecting. We go and get after it no matter what. But there are areas that the state has responsibility for and areas that our local fire protection districts have responsibility for. Those categories will differ in where the rules apply. And then we have the property status. So that's new buildings. That means nothing's here. I want to build a house in a yard. And then we have existing buildings. There's a house on my property and I own it. So where do the rules apply? Zone 0 at the moment applies to all zones in the state responsibility areas. That's very high, high, and moderate. And in the local responsibility areas, that's very high only. So in the local responsibility areas, it does not apply to high and moderate, only very high. to kind of illustrate some of the changes in the fire hazard severity zones. The maps that were released in 2025, if we're going on a sheer acreage metric, the figures here on the right-hand side are those acreage numbers from 2011 when the maps were last updated. And the maps this year have more acreage. So we're seeing these fire hazard severity zones increase. Now, what that means is that there are folks who previously did not have to adhere to rules that were applied to very high fire hazard severity zones, who now will find themselves in these zones and have to comply with these new rules. When did these rules start? Well, for new buildings and new landscapes, essentially they will begin when the process of adopting these rules concludes. The process concludes following the regulation filings and regulation acceptance. But as I mentioned earlier with the executive order, we now kind of know that they can do this no later than December 31st, 2025. Now, there is a timeline for when they are hoping to have all these things done. It is found on the website for the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, and a link to that website as well as an FAQ that they've put out on this process can be found on that document that I put in the chat. For existing buildings and landscapes, it will be exactly 3 years from when the regulations for new building and new landscape starts, right? Now I put an asterisk here, and that's because if you are currently located in the Ventura County Fire Department's area of service, it's already actually in effect as of March 1st, 2025. And it's already in effect for new buildings and new landscapes. And if VCFD goes by the same standards that the state is going to do, which is 3 years, that will be meaning that existing buildings and landscapes will have until March 1st, 2028. Now they don't have to do exactly what the state's doing, but that's just a guess. So what are some of the rules? What are we talking about? As I hope goes unsaid, the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection is still creating, and the process is not done. We now know more concretely that it will be done sooner rather than later. But just to give you guys a sense of what some of the rules are at the moment, at least being considered. And we have pretty good confidence that this list might not change very much. I put together this is a non-exhaustive list, but so far, things that are not permitted within Zone 0 are on the left, and things that are conditionally permitted in Zone 0 are on the right. So we're talking about an ember-resistant zone, a completely combustible-free space between your house and 5 feet away. Those include grasses, mulch, ornamental and native plants, shrubs, weeds, leaf litter, firewood, combustible trellises, window boxes, synthetic lawn, and then combustible boards, timbers, etc., and then combustible gates, fences, and fence attachment points. Conditionally permitted will be potted plants, with some rules regarding height and spacing of those, and they were not to be next to or below windows. And then with trees, no trees are going to be permitted within Zone 0, with an exception if a tree already exists in Zone 0, the bole of the tree is in Zone 0, and if that tree is taller than the adjacent structure's roof ridgeline. So this could change, but I imagine the idea is some of us already have pretty legacy trees or older trees that are right next to our homes that are big, and they're not necessarily presenting a tremendous fire risk as long as they're properly maintained. So quick, just to refresh the fire protection districts. Now I've put all three in Ventura County that will have to adopt some of these rules on here. That's Ventura County Fire Department, the City of Ventura Fire Department, and the Fillmore Fire Department. If our question is who ultimately kind of tells me what to do, the answer is these three entities, right? I did not include Oxnard Fire Department, although they will have some fire hazard severity zones at this time because they do not have any very high fire hazard severity zone in the LRA. So if we recall one of the flow charts, the state is creating the rules and the new maps. And these three fire protection districts are required to adopt the minimum standards set forth by the state. So they can go further, but at the moment, they have to adopt the minimum of what the state puts forth. Now, I will caveat and say that there are lots of rules that are already on the books. One example, so in the city of Ventura, already as part of their fire ordinance is that 0 to 5 feet from the structure, very low growing, high water content ground cover, few small shrubs with a 2 feet high maximum, no landscape mulch or wood chips, no trees. This is a recommended no planting zone. So this is already an ordinance on the books today that applies to both the high and the very high. The Fire Marshal of Ventura City, Brett Reed, let me know that he does not foresee this changing with the new fire hazard severity zones. But if this is news to you, if you're in the city of Ventura's fire protection district, then you might ask yourself, oh, I need to actually look at what these rules are because there might actually be rules on the books right now. So now, before we get into the fire hazard severity zones themselves, because we just went through a very exhaustive set of rules, I wanted to kind of just backtrack a bit to hopefully share and help folks understand on the Zoom why some of these rules are getting put into place. So just a few quick examples of why we know Zone 0 to be important and what we're hoping to avoid by instituting these changes, or what I think the board and the state is hoping to avoid by instituting these changes. So this is a quick video from a grass fire in Balch Springs, Texas in 2022. Now we had an accidental ignition from some folks mowing the grass off the highway, and the wind speeds were only about 15 to 20 miles an hour. But 9 homes were destroyed in this fire with 17 damage. And you can see from this video quite clearly how these wooden fences, pergolas, and outbuildings are contributing to the spread of fire from the wildland fuels, so the grasses, into the homes. They kind of acted as carriers of the fire. So the idea of why do we want no wooden fencing in Zone 0, it's to prevent fire going from the wildland fuels into the built environment. Now this video is from the 2023 Lahaina fire, which destroyed 2,200 buildings. And the peak wind gusts this evening were 80 miles an hour. But what you're seeing here is an example of what kind of ember cast can be generated from a burning structure. So in this case, there is a home that is ignited and actively burning, and it is just casting these embers in tremendous quantity and volume across the neighborhood. And those embers can therefore ignite other spot fires and contribute to more ignitions. I didn't point it out, but from earlier in the video to when it stopped, there's a little ignition that takes place in the top left. And then here, finally, we just have a video from the IBHS test laboratory in North Carolina, where they're simulating ember cast conditions at about 20 miles an hour. And what these folks have been studying is really major in our understanding of what gets ignited by these firebrands or embers. So they can flow up under eaves, into vents, accumulate on the roof and in the gutters. They kind of vortex and eddy around the corners of where two walls meet. And then they can really gather at the base of our homes against the siding there where they hit the wall and they get driven into the ground. Now you'll also notice that 5 feet isn't a magic number that the state has, pulled out of thin air. If you look at the video on the bottom there, the embers that hit the home and then kind of ricochet backwards out, they only actually make it about 5 feet away, right? So if we keep that zone, that area close to our house, free of combustible materials, then these embers that are flying and hitting our homes won't have any fuel to get lodged on, get stuck within, and then kind of ignite, right? So these rules and these numbers, these spacing guidelines, they're not being pulled out of thin air. They're usually the result of really savvy scientists and engineers studying these things under a close microscope. Okay. So that was zone 0. Now we're going to move into the fire hazard severity zone updates. So if anybody is unfamiliar with the fire hazard severity zones or how they operate, how they're created, I will quickly plug the 3 YouTube videos that are on CAL FIRE's website. What are the fire hazard severity zones, the history of these maps, and then the frequently asked questions, because they're very helpful. They do a great job of explaining what their effort is and how they actually get created, but they were last updated in 2007. They were updated this go around in a joint effort between the Office of the State Fire Marshal and the Fire and Resource Assessment Program. And they kind of do them in 2 batches. So they do them state responsibility area first, local responsibility area second. So they came out with the state responsibility area maps, and those became effective April 1st of 2024. And then the reason for me being doing this workshop today is that they were recently issued on March 10th of 2025. And our local agencies and the municipalities must adopt these within 120 days of that issuance. And so that deadline is therefore July 8th of 2025. Okay. So what we're actually talking about here, so the first map that you're seeing is actually just the viewer. Again, that link is in the document, where this map is showing both state responsibility areas and local responsibility areas, the most up-to-date zones. And on this viewer online, you're able to go in, you could type in your address, it'll take you right to it. You'll be able to see exactly where your parcel is situated, if I'm in a moderate, high, or very high fire hazard severity zone. So one of the big things between the 2007 or 2010 maps and the 2025 maps is that the last time they did this, they only had the requirement to adopt the very high local fire hazard severity zones, whereas in this go around, we're now adopting the very high, and moderate. So there are a tremendous number of properties that previously were not a part of a fire hazard severity zone because they might have been, LRA moderate, whereas now they are. And again, the map to see the old versus the new is linked in that document. So real quick, why has the fire hazard grown and why are these zones getting bigger? Well, 3 very quick, simple answers would be climate change, more development in our wildland urban interface, and vegetation change. So like I mentioned, the maps were last updated 2007 about. And the photo that you're seeing here is of a photograph of or the perimeter of the Tubbs fire, the 2018 Tubbs fire, in which if you kind of look at that map and preliminarily kind of just thinking about this in Sonoma County, well, much of that map looks to be a normal wildland fire perimeter. Probably a lot of wildland, hills, mountains, things like that. And then that very bottom left-hand corner, what I'm going to zoom into next, is what more we think about as being urban. So city development. So on the left, you'll see a kind of, this is the area that is zoomed in on the right. And the fire hazard severity zones are not even touching these areas. So this is an area of Santa Rosa called Coffee Park. The nearest fire hazard severity zone is actually about 1.5 miles away, and it's only a moderate fire hazard severity zone. And in the 2018 Tubbs fire, about 1,800 homes were destroyed in Coffee Park alone as a part of the 5,000 that were destroyed in the greater Santa Rosa area from wind gusts at up to about 70 miles an hour. And I keep pointing out the wind gust speeds because obviously, as we know, Ventura County gets some pretty serious wind gusts when the Santa Anas visit us. And again, before moving on, if we're kind of curious, how do these fire hazard severity zone maps compare with other analogous products, right? So yes, the state creates these. Are they good, or do they say the same thing other things do? Well, I took a quick video of these are data products created by a company called Pyrologics. And what you're seeing is structure exposure score on the top left, WUI damage potential on the top right, probability of high fire severity, bottom left, and then the time since the last fire. Well, the idea by pulling all these up is just you're basically seeing that there's a trend between all these maps, right? There's consistency. And if you were to take these maps and compare them with the new fire hazard severity zone maps, you would also see consistency, I promise. You could even take that this data is pre-2024 mountain fire. And if we take a look like we're doing now at the Camarillo Heights neighborhood impacted by the 2024 mountain fire, it's a good verification of this data's integrity, because they were rated as quite high in terms of structure exposure score and WUI damage potential. And the 2024 mountain fire destroyed about 83 homes just in Camarillo Heights. Okay. Now, what are these fire hazard severity zone updates? What are the implications for homeowners insurance? It's a great question. Essentially, the answer is that there should not be implications on your homeowner's insurance. So there are differences between a hazard map and a risk map. And it really goes down to the difference between hazard and risk at its core. So on the bottom, what you're seeing is a painting of some Chumash folks in Santa Barbara with a big wildfire burning in the Santa Ynez. And then to the right, a Santa Barbara wildfire, and essentially illustrating some things don't change, right? We live in Ventura County. We live in a very fire-prone landscape. Fires have been here before we got here, and they will continue after we're gone. However, the risk associated with those wildfires can change, right? So if anybody wants to buy that straw house at the top of a dead grass hill, good luck getting that insured, right, in these counties, because the likelihood of the hazard of wildfire of causing harm is probably quite high for that house. However, on the right-hand side, and that's a real company that creates a product called fortified homes or fortified structures. I guess they're bomb-proof according to their testing. Well, if I place one of those at the top of that grass hill, I might be better able to get insurance on that because there's a less likelihood of the hazard of wildfire causing harm to the asset that I'm asking to be insured, right? So essentially, fire hazard severity zone maps are used by planning and protection agencies and our municipalities. Risk maps or risk zones are used by the insurance companies. So the hazard, it can increase and decrease, right? Some areas that were previously in a fire hazard severity zone are no longer in a zone because maybe there's a big parking lot there now. It changes with the input conditions. The key with the hazard zones is that only some of these conditions are within your control. It is not within your control to influence the weather and the climate, nor the slope and topography of where your property is, nor the land that we are on, being a fire-prone, fire-adapted landscape. What has occurred over the past few years and since the last hazard maps were released is an increase in development in the WUI, as I mentioned, an increase in human ignition sources, differences in the quantity, makeup, and conditions of the fuels, and then a rapidly changing climate. So I did some back of the napkin math on the acreage changes in the fire hazard severity zones between the last one and this one. And in the LRA, our very high grew almost about 40%. No percent change on the moderate or high because, again, those weren't adopted the last time this was created. And then a significant decrease in moderate and high SRA because most of these acres went straight back into the very high. Now, risk is a bit different. So risk can increase or decrease depending on the changes in the input conditions, but most of these conditions are within your control, right? So utilizing defensible space, home hardening, and wildfire preparedness, right? We can ensure that the structure we want to protect, our home, has a lower risk of being impacted by the hazard of wildfire. And then especially doing it at a community scale, like many of the people on the call here are doing with Firewise USA, is lowering the risk of the community overall. So photograph there is the very first wildfire prepared home in Paradise, California. That is the Wildfire Prepared Program. If we are curious about learning more about that program and all of these videos, many of them have come from the IBHS, and I will say that I have noticed and been talking to folks recently that the Wildfire Prepared Home Designation Certificate is more frequently being required by insurance companies in order to retain or qualify for homeowners insurance, specifically in the wildland urban interface. So if some of us have received a letter saying we need to be wildfire prepared certified, that is the IBHS, that is this program here. Quick kind of plug on some of the events coming up for these fire hazard severity zone maps. So the adoption hearings for each local district, the dates and the times are here, as well as that community's planned date of adoption. So essentially, before adoption by public ordinance, these public hearings have been scheduled as part of the adoption process, although there is no formal comment period required by law. So there are some in here that we can make comments, but the truth is there was a 6-month timeline and period for public comment and input and changes to be made to these proposed fire hazard severity zone maps that took place last year. They're done. They are not changing between now and when they're adopted. So that kind of concludes these updates. Just a quick plug to take advantage of our programs if you have not already, or if you're not familiar with the services we offer. Firewise USA is why we are here, but you can also sign up for your free home wildfire assessment or take advantage of our chipper days, all of which can be found on our website, as well as more resources on home hardening and defensible space. And 145, that takes us into Q&A. Kevin asks, will the home assessment program be tailored in the future to the applicable rules implemented in each of the districts? Short answer, I'd say, Kevin, is no. Independent of what the rules are going to be in each particular district, the science says that is very specific and clear as far as what can be done to protect your home. And we always tailor these home assessments to just, inform you on what you can do to make your house more resilient. However, we will certainly be able to, and our assessors will be able to point you in the direction of where to find exactly the rules that apply to you, because those might be different in different districts. And we usually have handouts and different things when we do these assessments. But essentially, I would not think that we will be changing based on the applicable rules, because we go just by the recommended science and the latest knowledge. Kristen asks, I live in a very high fire hazard zone. All the houses in my roof have the Spanish barrel tiles. I'm worried about blowing embers. Should we plug these holes? And if so, with what? Could it damage the roof by reducing drainage capability? That's a great question. I would say that with barrel tiled roofs, we definitely have a concern of embers getting in there. Some Class A rated roofs that have the barrel tiles already have these kind of bird stop type assemblies embedded. Others are mortared. Basically, there are various ways to plug the gaps that embers could penetrate into, but a roofing professional, a licensed roofing professional, could ensure that in retrofitting these roofs, we wouldn't be doing damage. But I would only recommend using a contracted or a licensed contractor for that, with a specialty in roofing, so that we didn't do any damage. Kevin asked, VCFD handles both LRAs and SRAs for the state, correct? Will the rules be the same for both areas if handled by VCFD? That is a great question. So one thing that I didn't actually talk about, which I wish I would have, is that the reason why we don't know too much or have to care about SRA versus LRA in Ventura County is that we are a contract county. So Ventura County Fire Department does handle the fire protection district services for the SRA in our county. And there is comparatively very little SRA in Ventura County as a whole. So, and there are actually pretty few communities or homes in our SRAs, but the rules are likely to be the same for both areas if handled by VCFD, like you asked, Kevin, except that VCFD does not have a choice in whether or not it applies the rules to high and moderate for the SRA, if that makes sense. So the state has said that these rules will apply to the very high and moderate in the SRA. Now, if the Ventura County Fire Department would like to continue to keep these rules just applying to the very high, it can do that for the local responsibility areas, but it cannot do that for the state responsibility areas under its control. But that is a small percentage of the development in this county. I own a home Lori says, I own a home in Ojai, in which almost every home has flammable large trees in zone 0s and 1. The neighborhood is now the highest risk category. What risk do such trees pose, and will they be removed in both zones 0 and 1? That's a good question, Lori. I will point out that already decreed by the Ventura County Fire Department is that the protections afforded to oak trees in the county will stay. And there's good reason to do that. Oak trees specifically provide a tremendous benefit in terms of shielding properties from ember cast. In fact, along the 101 freeway corridor through Calabasas, there is a large project taking place to get oak trees on both sides of that highway in order to, in theory, shield it from ember cast from a adjacent wildfire in the future for folks to have a safe corridor for escape. So basically, oak trees afford a great amount of protection. As far as if trees will be removed in zone 0s and 1, well, it very much is dependent on a case-by-case basis, what type of tree it is, whose property it is, and whether or not that tree is protected. Kevin, does risk or hazard decrease if a recent wildfire has reduced the nearby fuel load? That's a fantastic question. One that I will say has been touched on in some of those videos that CAL FIRE has released. So a good example of this might be folks that live in Chico, California, next to the Park Fire scar from this past summer. At the moment, those folks don't have much fuel that they're living next to. However, these maps are meant to not be good for just a few years. And so they create these hazard maps, essentially understanding that we could have a fire nearby that lowers our risk for the next few years. But the truth is that vegetation comes back and those maps can't be updated that real time. And so in actuality, in reality, yes, risk and hazard decrease if a recent wildfire has reduced the nearby fuel load. But in terms of a state hazard map or a insurance department's or company's risk model, it will not likely take that into account. All right. Timothy asks, in Ventura County, is Ventura County instituting tighter rules for fuel fire breaks in open space and wildland adjacent to the city, e.g. the hillsides between Highway 33 Ojai, Santa Paula, and the 126? I wouldn't be able to answer that question, Timothy. That would be something to ask the Ventura County Fire Department. As far as the implications of the new updates to Zone 0 and fire hazard severity zones, nothing within those two updates or developments would indicate the increasing of rules on these fire breaks. But if you wanted to elaborate more or follow up with me via email, there are lots of projects ongoing, pretty much all the time and regardless of state level rules to maintain the existing fuel breaks in the county. Randall asks, does the 5-foot Zone 0 measure from the wall or measure from the vertical exterior wall of the house or from the edge of the roof line, which is usually a few feet farther out from the walls? My understanding is that the IBHS is saying that it goes from the side of the wall itself. So not I've called it basically the fascia board. Now that's just the IBHS though. I am not certain where the state is going to measure either from the fascia board or from the wall itself. I would imagine that it could be the fascia board and would not be surprised as such, but I don't actually know right now. Nancy asked the same question. I personally don't love the idea of just the wall of the house because of the known vulnerability of heat being trapped underneath our eaves. Sometimes in Ventura County, I've gone to homes where the eaves are 18 inches away from the wall. I've gone to many homes where the eaves extend 6 feet. And so that would make quite a difference. Randall asks, are citrus trees considered good ember cast barriers like the oaks? Randall, that's a great question. In general, citrus, fruit, and avocados, to my understanding, um, prove to be perform or have more resilience than certain other trees. However, as far as being good ember cast barriers, not so much, because when you think about a coastal live oak, the reason they're so good at protecting embers is because their canopy is very dense, very thick. Most citrus trees you see, just don't have the foliage and the canopy to protect. Additionally, I think that the citrus trees, it's going to be quite a change for this county because many people have them within their zone zero, and the bowls of which exist now and are in zone zero, but citrus trees never get tall enough to be, above the adjacent structure's roof line. So, and then I got one more question. Denise asks, in the neighborhood we live in, there are wood shingle, I'm gonna guess you meant to say roofs, wood fences, and patio covers. Under the new rules, will all of those need to be replaced? How do we pay for this tremendous expense? Well, Denise, under the new rules, the only thing that would need to to be actually replaced would be the portion of your wooden fence that is within 5 feet of your home itself, and that small portion, the attachment point that is actually attached to the house. Your patio cover can stay, and the remainder of the wooden fence can stay. The zone zero would make it such that your ember resistant fuel-free zone would extend around your wooden patio cover. But they do not need to be all fully replaced. And as far as how to pay for this tremendous expense, my understanding is that is the rationale behind both the state and the local districts largely adopting a 3-year timeline between when these rules will be enforced. So 3 years to make the arrangements necessary to get those portions of the fencing replaced. Okay. Sarah, were there any other questions I might have missed? Oh, okay. Kevin asks, I thought VCFD has considered a remodel to under the new construction rules. Kevin, that's a good question. Standard 515 from the Ventura County Fire Department is still being updated. At the moment, the what is classified as a remodel versus new construction is pretty well articulated on their webpage and on Standard 515, but there will be more guidance to come. And if you want to follow up with me, I can probably point you in the right direction to get better answers. Okay, and Sarah says that was the last one.